We're going to be supported by the fire of 6 stained guns. They're going to be maybe 400 yards further distant than where we got off the bus. And we're going to be silent. We're not going to be BSing because the Confederates are less than 150 yards in front. We want it to be a surprise attack. And what we do, we deploy by regimental, by company. 2 companies doubled up. So we do not extend our left and right flanks much more than 15 yards to the left and right of where I'm standing. Then over to this is, since we're the center, we're the 96th Pennsylvania. Then on their left will be in the same formation, the 5th Maine. I'm sorry, Marty, not the 17th Maine. And on my right will be the 121st New York. And behind them will be the same formation, 3 regiments, and behind them another 3 regiments, and behind them the 3 Vermont regiments. From the 2nd Vermont, the 5th Vermont, and the 6th Vermont. And when we hear those cannons open fire, what we have done, we have been moved up so we are near the edge of the woods. In the two first lines, the men will have loaded their pieces and capped them. But they are told we will not halt. We will continue going until we enter the Confederate line. The Confederates are oblivious to what is out in front of them. Their abattis, or the fell timber, is only about 15 to 20 yards in front of the Confederate rifle pits, or trenches. And as they look at their watches, Upton will be mounted, the only one mounted. He will be on the extreme right of his regiment, the 121st New York. Now let us move up and halt briefly at the edge of the woods, and then we will move at a trot. Break the Confederate line. So he has got a sentence if he doesn't succeed, or death, or to be imprisoned. So then the 3rd regiment, the next 3 will come over, and they will try to plunge ahead to reach the McCool house. And then only when called forward will be the 3 Vermont regiments. They're expecting, since no one has told them, and no one had told Mott that everything had been changed, they're expecting Mott to attack the apex of the salient. But Mott has already been repulsed back there at 4 o'clock, so he will get no help. All right, and when we advance, we're going to chant forward, forward, and we want to hear what the Confederates are doing at this time. General Lee, you're in this area, aren't you? Are they all out of the timber? And one thing you do, O'Reilly, and with myself, even more than me, you can hear O'Reilly a long way. O'Reilly and I have one thing going in common. We have voices that are loud and carry. If we were tenors or sopranos, or spoke gently like some men and all women speak gently, you have some loudmouth women too. they would not hear you as well as you folks do.
Oh, that's a little hard to follow. All right, the Confederates have entrenched a mule shoe. This is your first chance to glimpse that. from a federal perspective. Up where the buses are located is inside the Confederate line. Trenches are just located on the brow of the hill between us and the bus. This part that juts out immediately in front of you is George Dole's Georgia Brigade. 3 regiments of Georgians located inside the overall mule chute. As you look off towards the left, the Confederate line is going to extend up into those beautifully blossoming green trees and off to the tip of the mule chute. And then it is going to start to double back across your front further away so that it forms a U shape with the point organized up in this direction. So we are looking at the western face of the mule chute. The 3rd Richmond Howitzers are located just to the right of our right-hand bus. From where we're standing, you cannot see the tip of the mule chute. And that is because there are folds in the ground that cover our left and block our vision. Off to the right, you can see another one of those folds in the ground. It prevents us from seeing the Confederate left over towards the Brock Road. We are sitting in a piece of low ground, and everything is up above us here. It is good for the Confederates to have skirmishers out here to watch this piece of ground, but they have neglected to keep their skirmishers here, and as a result, George Dole's Georgians have to stay mighty close to their trenches. That allows these Federals to penetrate so close and observe them. When the Federals come forward, they have to face Confederate fire from the front. But they will not have to face Confederate fire from the side, because the fold in the ground will protect their flank. We will not have to worry about the right flank, because the Confederates will not be able to offer an oblique fire because of the folds in the ground. The Confederates have made an error in losing this ground. What they considered an obstacle, a piece of low ground, has now turned into an avenue of approach for the Federals to come forward on a concentrated front and their flanks protected from direct fire. Which means from here on out, Emory Upton's adversary is just 3 small regiments of Georgians, led by George Dole. When we get up into the Confederate line, we'll talk a little bit more about George. He's one of those great illustrious beings that, for some reason, never got a nickname. So, maybe it's time to attack.
Okay. Now you should go forward. The ones that are ambulatory, you can move. Prodding, canning. Those 2 guns of Smith's battery. But as when we get General Doles up here, he will explain the Confederate gunners are going to be smart enough to take the gun tools with them, which means they can't short the gun. Okay, we're going to be joined by General Doles, I've been told, and Robert E. Lee, and maybe Captain Smith.
George Doles is a hard charger. The lead brigade in Stonewall Jackson's flank attack at Chancellorsville is George Doles. As they emerged in that wonderfully successful attack, Doles rode out in front of his lines. His horse was killed, and as he fell to the ground, he was closer to the Federals than he was to his own brigade. Fearing that the Federals would come out and nab him, the general did something interesting. He played dead. As his brigade rolled past him, he was suddenly resurrected and joined in the attack. Gettysburg, July 1st, 1863. George Doles' brigade will be striking at the hinge of the 1st and the 11th Corps up on Oak Hill. He will launch an imminently successful attack. His horse will be shot again. A second horse lost to him. And it goes careening towards the Union line. At the last minute, he flopped out of the saddle and played dead. Until the Georgians caught up, and then he was reanimated. May 10th, 1864. George Dole's men have been here on high alert all day, knowing that they have nothing of a skirmish line to speak of. But nothing has been done all day to exploit that. Federal attacks have occurred off to the north of us under Mott, off to the south of us or west of us under Warren and Hancock, but nothing happened here. So as the day ends, the Georgians are satisfied that the crisis has abated. It is dinner time, and they start making their supper. And then all of a sudden, an obnoxious, rowdy crowd of Yankees shouting, "Forward, forward, forward," came blasting out of these woods. And it was a huge surprise to them. George Doles does not have his weapons. He is fixing his dinner. He has a frying pan. His line is inundated in a matter of seconds. They put up a terrific defense for only a moment. In that first line of Upton's attackers, almost every one of the men who fell were shot through the head. As the Confederates only had time to raise their rifles and fire almost straight up into the faces of their attackers. As the Federals came roiling over these earthworks, cascading in among the Confederates, hand-to-hand combat breaks out. It is bitter. It is malevolent. The color bearer of the 44th Georgia loses his flag. When they recover his body later, he has 16 bayonet wounds through his body. In his clenched fists were still threads of the flag that he had defended to death. But the Confederates are surprised, they are overwhelmed, and within a matter of moments, 900 Confederates are surrounded and surrender. They are captured on this hilltop. Upton's attack has been eminently successful, and among those captured is George Doles. As the Confederates are moved across the earthworks and started back towards the 6th Corps, Confederates above us and below us are under the impression that the Georgians are launching a counterattack, because there are more of them than the Federals. But they are the prisoners. Doles only gets a few feet into the field when he trips over a root and falls flat on his face. And he plays dead. Guards kick him, but his body doesn't move. And they leave him. At this moment, Robert E. Lee is not very far away, and he is facing a grave crisis. The mule shoe has been compromised. It has been penetrated, and there are Federals that are starting to expand upon that, driving down the works, driving up the works, and driving through the works. As they expand in 3 different directions, all the Confederates in the tip of the mule shoe and in the trees behind you, the high ground that marks the east face of the mule shoe, are now in jeopardy because the threat comes from behind the works now. Robert E. Lee, highly emotional, will see the first of the reinforcements coming in, Junius Daniels, North Carolinians, and he will ride forward with them in their counterattack. May 10th, 4 days after Widow Taps. And the men will shout, "Lee to the rear" again. Staff officers will intercede again. Lee's staff will appeal to their general, saying, if there is something you want done, let us do it. If you want us to go somewhere, give us the order. But this is not your place. Lee realizes that he has paralyzed part of his defense because he has become a distraction. And he quietly accedes to them and backs off, sending his staff officers into the maelstrom. They form up a line in this direction and stop the penetration. They start pulling troops out of the tip of the mule shoe and sending them around to blunt the folks who have gone into the midst of the Confederates. Maryland Stewart's men are going to be making that attack. Maryland Stewart, who we saw on Saunders Field yesterday, will now be coming out of the tip of the mule shoe to fight against these men. He'll be accompanied by a young staff officer who has literally joined him this day. He is so new to the Army, he doesn't even have a uniform. He wears his black Sunday best. It is Maryland Stewart's little brother. His first battle, and he is so naive, he will stand brazenly on top of the earthworks, telling the men not to worry, keep pushing. And he will come off without a scratch. The Stonewall Brigade, Stonewall Jim Walker, is going to pull his men out of the earthworks just above us and turn and face and fire down the works themselves. Confederates will be attacking from 3 directions, containing the breakthrough, and ultimately driving Upton's men backwards. It is emotionally charged, it is intense, the losses are heavy. Upton gets no reinforcements. Horatio Wright, his new corps commander, as Ed has pointed out, is not privy to the planning out here. And he is not in a position to send reinforcements to exploit the breakthrough. Upton is on his own. Upton lost 1,000 men being driven out of this works. 1 in every 4 Federal soldiers who came across this field, 1 in every 4 is a casualty. As they are driven back, the Confederates reclaim their works and drive out into the field, chasing them across the field. And who should emerge from the grave? George Doles, leading the counterattack. In a war that is rife with wonderful nicknames, how is it possible that George Doles doesn't get a great nickname?
Possum Doles.
Yeah.
Possum Doles. He's the ultimate perfect name.
Lazarus Doles.
Lazarus, yeah.
As it is, Lazarus Doles, poor Possum Doles, his brigade is wrecked, and the general's psyche has been destroyed. From here on out, one of the most combative officers of the Army of Northern Virginia will be a mere shadow of himself and be a true reflection of his brigade and its former glory. From here on out, members of the Doles Brigade remember distinctly that Doles will embrace death from here on out. He will look for it. And before we get very far down the road, he will find it. He will die at Cold Harbor, but not in the great grand assaults of June 1st or June 3rd. He will die in a meaningless, nothing skirmish, a scattering of fire on June 2nd. His death is totally unnecessary, but perhaps foreordained, simply because of the experience that had occurred right here. So the possum ultimately does triumph, but the possum is destroyed in reclaiming this line. So we not only have to look at the events in real time as they occur in the moment, but how they affect the psyche of the men who participate in these things and what they carry as that baggage into their future experiences. Doles, one of the great commanders, ceases to be a great commander after June 10th, or after May 10th. So in the immediacy of the crisis, we might think that all is well, but all is not well. Lee has also, again, been hyperactive, engaged by the whole thing, being part of the process. That also speaks volumes. Lee feels an obligation to be much closer to the action, to be much more attuned to the action and to affect the action directly with his own interaction. That's not a good trend. Where are Grant and where is Meade? Grant is sitting in the artillery works behind Upton, observing it. Meade isn't even that close. Lee is in the very midst of it. What an interesting dynamic of leadership here. As it is, Upton's attack has, on the surface, failed. But there is a deeper meaning to it. And General Grant grasps it immediately. The survivors are barely back across that field when General Grant says, a brigade today, a corps tomorrow. Upton has proven something to us. He has shown us that you can get to earthworks, and you can break earthworks. We've done it on a small scale. It is time to do it again on a much larger scale. And this time, we'll set our target as the most vulnerable spot on the Confederate line. We're going to target the tip of the mule shoe on May 12th. Colonel Upton is going to be rewarded by becoming Brigadier General Upton.
They didn't enforce the don't come back.
He did not enforce the don't come back, precisely. Instead, they give the man a promotion. And that speaks volumes among the Army as well. Because it tells us that if you're ambitious, and if you are innovative, and if you are fearless, you will be rewarded.
And lucky.
And lucky. I was once told by Special Forces there are only two types of soldiers in the world. There are good and there are lucky. And nobody wants to be good.
The only thing I got to add is, again, going back to Lee. Lee is in the area. We heard where Meade is. We heard where Grant is. At the time of the attack, Lee is down near the Harrison house. What is he doing there? He's already thinking that maybe he is going to lose the mule shoe. And he's overseeing the people of Battle's Brigade, who we met yesterday up at Sanders Field, because there are worker bees today, and they're growing up the new line of earthworks that will eventually become Lee's final line. So Lee is very close to here, and he will intervene, and he'll also be responsible for sending gunners up with tools when the Confederates recapture those guns there, so they can man them and open at the enemy. Because the Confederate gunners of Smith's Richmond howitzers are smart enough, when they lose the guns, they're going to take the gunner tools away. So I think you can see we're in a good place leading into the thought processes of General Grant, and we're now ready to go to our next stop. Any questions? And I don't see Ray giving us the finger sign.
Rest stop next. Back to those luxury bathrooms.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to mount.
To stand at the Brown House, which shows on your map, and see all the way to the McCool House, which is impossible because the Park Service does not own the land very far north of that wall of trees we can see off to our right. We heard what Grant had said. Where a brigade can go, a corps can go. In other words, where 4,000 men could go, which is really 2 brigades, a corps of 20,000 men can go. So Upton has opened Grant's eyes. As Frank has pointed out, to how you can break the Confederate line. So Meade will have to come up with a plan how to do it. Now, the corps that is going to break the Union line will be actually more than 20,000 men. It will be the 2nd Corps, commanded by General Hancock. Grant is very confident on the 11th. He will send a message to Washington to General Halleck to share with the Secretary of War that he believes that the Confederate morale has broken. The fighting of the last 4 days has convinced Grant of that. Undoubtedly, his only real success has been the one scored by Upton on the 10th. And he'll also send Congressman Washburn. Larry Hewitt, if he was slenderer and dressed in the severe black clothes and hat, a congressman, Grant's patron, will be given a message to carry back to Washington on the 11th. One of the most quoted words, one of the most quoted phrases associated with U.S. Grant. I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer. On your map, you can see what General Burnside is going to do. He's going to, instead of attacking down the road against Fredericksburg, where he'd attacked on the 10th and got General Stevenson, one of his division commanders, killed, he's going to change the axis of his advance again, looking at the plan, map 21. He is going to strike the Confederate position from the east, near the area where the mule shoe ties into the main Confederate line, and where you have a bulge coming out of the Confederate line, where you can see General Early. That bulge is known as Hussein. That is where General Burnside is going to strike. The attack is to begin at 10 o'clock, at 4 a.m. Now, General Wright will be where we can see his corps, and he is going to have 2 divisions of his 3 ready to send forward to exploit any success. And Grant is certain it is going to be a great success scored by the 2nd Corps. And General Warren is again going to put the pressure on the enemy at Laurel Hill. Now the weather, which has been good for the last 5-6 days, turns bad on the night of the 11th and 12th. And the chief engineer of the Army of the Potomac is Colonel Mendel. He's a member of the class of 1846. He was numero uno. McClellan was numero dos, number 2. And he will have the task of guiding the 2nd Corps into position through these woods. Horrible weather. Lightning, rain coming down, and his mission is to position the 2nd Corps near the Brown House, where they will form up. And as he is guiding them through this storm, horrible weather, he is going to get very angry. And he'll go to Mendel and says, "What the hell are you trying to do? Lead me around the world and bring me up in back of the Union of the Confederate position." Be that as it may, they will finally get the 2nd Corps into position at the Brown House. It will be open ground. If it was daylight, they could see the mule shoe. With the rain and such, they cannot. So So we will go into the deployment of it, but whereas Barlow's division attacking in regimental and company columns will be 40 ranks deep. That's bad for you. You're in the first rank. You're in the second rank, and you're going to probably be blown into eternity. But the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh, eventually they're going to come into their Yankee line. And again, all those men in Barlow's command, his division, will go forward with their weapons loaded, but their piece is not capped. Now, the rain is falling, and that ain't going to bother the Yankees much. But it's when you turn it over to General Edward Johnson, who has joined me. He's a bachelor, you know. Unlike the real Frank O'Reilly, he's a womanizer. He likes women. And he carries a heavy cudgel in lieu of a sword, because a heavy cudgel is good to lay across your back, Bill, in case you slap. So we'll go into this because Lee is going to make some errors at it. Because Lee knows something is going to happen because he can hear the troops moving about. And we better, we're either going to bring, Frank gets to be either General Johnson, John's son, Edward Johnson, West Point, 1838, or he can be General Lee, or he can be General Ewell. Ewell is under a cloud. Frank, at the battle on the 10th, Ewell lost his cool. Instead of rallying his troops and giving them coherent orders, Lee comes up and sees him hitting men across the backsides, and Lee is is beginning to decide that Ewell maybe has serious problems. He's going to be reinforced this day, and then he'll be reinforced even more at Aaron's Bar. So we're not going to make you General Ewell. You're going to be either General Ewell or General Johnson.
Whew, that's a relief. I thought I had a choice here. Being a perfect Virginia gentleman, military genius, idiot, or womanizer. I'm thinking womanizer. Well, he's a womanizer, would I care? All right. As Ed has already pointed out, the night is miserable. The weather is harsh, and that works to the Union advantage. Confederates are not going to be able to hear as much of a Union army on the march because of all this incidental noise. If they do hear the noise, how ambitious are they going to be to get out from their dry shelters to go investigate? Not very. It is not a motivating night. But 20,000 plus Union soldiers on the march make a lot of noise. It becomes painfully obvious when the Second Corps marches behind the Union lines. Union bands in the front lines have to start playing to mask the noise with music. If listening to Hail Columbia at midnight in a rainstorm doesn't sound suspicious, you are probably in the wrong business. So, the Confederates are on the alert. They're listening to this, and they can plainly mark the progress of the Second Corps across their front. The big question is, what does it mean? We have seen a movement like this before, where the armies have fought for several days to a bloody standstill, and then the Federals disengage and sidestep us, going from their left to their right, going from the west to the east, and from north to south. We saw it at the Wilderness. And that was a frightening experience. The Confederates were engaged in a foot race that took them to Spotsylvania, a foot race they won by minutes and by yards, and by good luck. It appeared that the same thing was happening again. Grant is telling the folks in Washington that he believes Lee is beaten. Lee is under the impression that Grant is beaten. And that Grant is sidestepping off to the east to center his forces on the Courthouse Road, either to retreat back to Fredericksburg or to sidestep Spotsylvania altogether. Either way, he has been defeated. This line is impervious to attack. Trying to anticipate the Federals, the Confederates are going to be abandoning this line. They're going to be moving one step ahead of the Federals. The troops on your maps that are furthest away from the intersection at Spotsylvania Courthouse are the fellows in these trenches right before you. The 2nd Corps, Richard Ewell's Corps. Other troops are close to the road, and they would be fast and expeditious in getting out of here. But the 2nd Corps will have a hard time getting out of these woods and getting back to a road. So in the course of the night, Robert E. Lee is going to order this position abandoned. Ironic, the spot where the Federals are coming to attack is the spot that the Confederates are going to give up without a fight. But it's raining, and it's miserable, and the soldiers will have to stand around Spotsylvania Courthouse and get soaked and get cold. They're sitting in these trenches with their tent halves over the top to keep them dry. Allegheny Ed Johnson appealed. Let the men stay, and they can catch up. So they're allowed to stay. But the thing that has always made this position impervious, impregnable, is not Allegheny Ed Johnson. It is the 24 cannon inside Allegheny Ed Johnson's line. When Mott's division came out on May 10th, they were blown back into the woods without so much as spending 5 minutes in the city. The artillery was their devastation. On this night, the artillery is ordered to move. But unlike Johnson, they cannot catch up. They need to go now. So the ultimate irony is that the one thing that makes this spot impregnable, the artillery, is the one thing that is going to lead. And Johnson's men are going to be here alone. As the night goes on, the 2nd Corps noise crosses our front. But unlike anywhere else, the Union noise stops here. And the Union noise builds here. They are no longer under the impression this is a turning move. They are the object of a Union attack. It becomes absolutely vital to get that artillery back immediately. Regimental commanders are going to wake up brigade commanders and bring a sleepy Maryland Stewart out to the trenches, get them all wet, and make him listen to the sound of the Federals out beyond the woods at the Brown Farm. It sounds like a babbling brook of constant activity. He wants the artillery back. He'll wake his division commander, Ed Johnson, and ask for the guns back. Ed Johnson will wake the Corps commander, Richard Stoddard Ewell, and ask for the guns back. Richard Stoddard Ewell will quiz his chief of artillery, Armistead Long, where are the guns? And he said that it is on the order of Lee, so we will wake the Army commander, Robert E. Lee, and ask for the guns back. Robert E. Lee will talk to his chief of artillery, William Nelson Pendleton, about the guns. And Pendleton says they can have the guns. Lee says they can have the guns. Richard Ewell says they can have the guns. Ed Johnson orders the guns. The guns are 2.5 miles away from us, and the horses have been unharnessed and are grazing around Spotsylvania Courthouse, ironically where we grazed earlier today with our lunch.
Good spot.
they have to rush an order down there and get those horses harnessed and the guns back. As much as Lee wanted to abandon this spot to avoid a foot race with the Union Army, he has inadvertently created a foot race with the Union Army, because now it becomes a mere question of who will arrive here first, the Union 2nd Corps or the Confederate 2nd Corps artillery. These are the elite units of both armies that we're talking about. Whatever happens, it will be difficult for everyone involved. We are now getting on to 4 o'clock in the morning, May 12th. The weather is not improved, and the situation is about to get a lot worse. Just give the instructions.
All right, give me the instructions. For the people.
Where's North? You guys are doing good.
You're doing better than Colonel Mendel was doing.
They're doing much better than Colonel Mendel was doing. The 2nd Corps did not come down this road, but they came down a road rather similar to this. They did this in the night. They did it in darkness. They did it in rain. Even when the engineers scouted out the route for the 2nd Corps, they did it in daylight, and they did it without the nasty weather. So all the landmarks they familiarized themselves with have vanished in the night. And that's how they get lost. And that's why General Barlow gets sarcastic and demands not to do a world tour to get into their rear. There are others here who are also disgruntled and disillusioned and disorganized. Nelson Miles, one of the brigadiers serving under Barlow, is going to be grousing about what is wrong with the war. And he starts with the president and starts working his way down. Barlow found it rather humorous, and at one point said he caught himself holding on to the pommel of his saddle with both hands because he was laughing so hard he was afraid he'd fall off. But when he realized that nobody behind them was laughing, it was having a severe impact on their morale, and he had to tell them to shut up. There's a lot of hurry up and wait out here in these woods, and that is debilitating. There are a number of men who are virtually zombified. They haven't slept well in weeks. They have been under constant torment, in constant danger. One officer here is going to find it almost impossible to stay awake. He will get off his horse because he's afraid he'll fall off the animal. He sits on a fence rail to collect his thoughts, nodded off, fell off the fence, and broke his neck. This is an ugly, ugly venture. The 2nd Corps is only supposed to go 4 miles from where they were extracted from the line to their jump-off point at the Brown Farm. And 4 miles is going to turn into an all-night Icelandic saga. It seems to have no end. Even when they get out to the Brown Farm, things should improve, but they do not. In fact, things will get considerably worse as we go further.
When they get to the Brown Farm, they're supposed to attack at 4. It's much worse if you're marching, as any person knows. You'd rather be moving than standing still. And Barlow is going to decide on his own initiative he is going to postpone the attack for 45 minutes, hoping that the weather conditions will improve. Now we're focusing on Barlow. We're going to march on Barlow. And Barlow is the one division that is going to be in the same formation as Upton. They're going to be attacking by regimental column. And that is going to be men 40 deep in a really narrow front. To the right is a division of Birney. Excuse me. And Birney will be attacking in line of battle. He is not supposed, Barlow is supposed to hit the aiming point. And in support of Barlow, as you can see if you look to the next map, is going to be the brigades of Mott. In support of Barlow, also moving in line of battle, not the formation that is used by Barlow, will be given. So altogether, 20,000 men are going to be moving forward when they do. The Confederate picket line will be deployed along the farm lane that leads to the Landrum house. And they will be the first to hear the enemy getting close. At that time, it is clear all the way from the Brown house to the Landrum picket line. And the Confederate pickets, when they open fire, most of them will get a pop and no explosion of the propellant charge because the rain has just running down the bores of their guns causes their weapons to not go off. So that is a favorable event for the Federals. Later on, after they've broken the line, Hancock will advance his headquarters to the Landrum house, which becomes his command post. All right, folks, let's go on. Picket line. And we would be facing in this direction. And you would see no trees. You're soon out of the park, and you would see no trees then extending all the way to the Brown farm. And for the Brown farm, too bad they quit cutting timber a long time ago when Bound Region wasn't receptive. The ground would be open there, and you could see the side of the McCool house. And you're going to see we're going to cross a deep ravine before we get there. We will be in defilade. The only warning we're going to have, since most of the pickets guns misfired, is when these pickets fall back, the ones that are not captured, and you're going to get a little bit of alert. But if you're in the Confederate main line of resistance, if you're Witcher's left wing and the Louisiana's right wing, you're going to see a big blue blob moving towards you. It's going to be about 250 yards across, and it's almost as deep. It's 40 ranks deep. And as we approach there, we're going to bring in the Longstreet, Johnson's chief of artillery, and he's going to, the Union are going to win the race. We are going to be in the rebel works just as the first guns of the Confederate guns, 24 in all, returning to their position, are going to arrive, and not very many of them, and we'll turn it over to Frank to tell what happens over there. But we are going into the rebel works. We are going to capture lots of Federals. We're going to capture lots of Confederate cannon, and we're going to capture 2 Confederate generals. All right, when the breakthrough occurs, we're going to walk the breakthrough, but when the breakthrough occurs, they will capture 2 generals. Marty Gaines' great-grandfather, Frank Haskell, will be one of the 2 men that get to escort Edward Allegheny Johnson to the rear. He's hard to capture because he's resting in a bomb-proof. He comes out, finds the Union around, and he's a tough customer. And he'll be using his cudgel to hold the Union troops off. They have bayonets, they're poking at him, and he'll finally be disarmed. When he goes to the rear there, he's taken to Hancock. And headquarters. They're old friends from the old army. Johnson had graduated in '38 from Chesterfield County, Virginia, and Hancock is graduate of 1842. And when they arrive, escorted by Frank Haskell and the one other man, General Hancock is rather delighted. He's probably more delighted to learn that they've captured over 3,200 other Confederates. The second division, the Johnson's division, has all but been destroyed. Now, how you receive is how you act. So when Johnston arrives as a prisoner, he still has his cudgel, and he arrives and Hancock recognizes him. And Hancock, since remember this is General Johnson. He's an old friend of his. And they have hoisted a few in the old army. And I will stick out my hand to General Johnston, and we're going to shake hands. I'm then going to reach into my pocket, into my vest, for my personal decanter. And I'm going to hand him my personal decanter, and he is going to drink out of my personal decanter, and then he is going to give him one of my cigars.
Things are getting better here.
And I can see his leg. So we're going to summon an ambulance. So he will get to Belle Plaine in an ambulance. Shortly thereafter, Frank has probably alerted you if you were watching, because I knew how to watch Frank, because he has indicated that Marilyn Stewart's disposition is not as convivial or congenial. And when he arrives here, I will stick out my hand. And Stewart refuses to take my hand. And will say, under these circumstances, I will not shake your hand. So I'm going to say, and I'll probably say, you SOB, under other circumstances, I would not extend my hand. And he is not going to get a pull on my personal decanter. He is not going to get a cigar. And he's going to be like the lowest ranking private captured. He is going to walk all the way to Belle Plaine. So we wanted to get that story in here. Now remember, that is going to occur after what we're going to do now, because they're literally going to destroy the Johnson's division, capturing 2 generals, many colonels, lots of standard colors, probably capture too many colors and such, because they're going to have a problem, because they've literally destroyed a Confederate division, captured most of the Confederate cannons, all except all the Confederate cannon, and only 2 will have got off a round of ammunition, and it looks like Grant has his beachhead, but now we're going to walk that ground with you, and Frank will share some words before we begin.
Is it still raining while it's attack?
Yes, it will rain all day, all afternoon, and rain into the evening, and into way past midnight, as the men club, punch, and anywhere you can kill or subdue a man from, say, about 6 o'clock in the morning until 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, as then, only then will they break it off when they learn from General Lee that the Confederates have completed a new line across the base of the Mule Shoe, and they'll fall back to what shows on map 24, right?
Real quickly before we start walking, the ground we are on is troublesome and problematic. when the Federals line up at the Brown Farm to make their attack, they have not been here. They are not familiar with the ground. The only people who've been here is Mott's division. And they barely entered into this open field before they were blasted back into the woods. All the Federals are told is that the Confederates are located on a high ridge. The ridge must be taken with complete surprise. There will be no artillery barrage preceding the attack. There will be no gunfire until you are inside the Confederate line. There will be no cheering, telegraphing our coming. All they are told is that the Confederates are on a high ridge. As the Federals advance through the rain, through the mist and the ground fog that is swelling up, there is only about a 35 to 40 yard visibility. And when they come to this ridge, they meet the picket line. They're engaged. The Confederates will fire off into their faces at near point blank range, which is a surprise to both sides. The Federals have met resistance. They answer it. They fire back at it. They inundate it. They capture it. And everything erupts in cheering. Because we are on a ridge among the Confederates. It's only the more discerning that realize there's another ridge, a bigger ridge, and this was far too easy. So, the Confederates have been up all night long waiting for this moment. They know it's coming. They're anticipating their artillery, and the infantrymen are trying to keep their powder dry. A Louisiana soldier is going to admonish the men around him in the darkness, shouting out, "Wide awake, boys! There will be blood for breakfast." The only variable that these Confederates do not have is the when. Until 4:35 a.m., when this entire ridge erupts in cheering. You folks have to get from here to there. And they know you're coming. So things have gotten a lot more tricky. Let's follow the events.